Okay, ready to go? Reminds me of politicians on budget day, a little red box like this. Contained within here are 51 votes that the clubs have sent through calling for an EGM. After the media conference today, I'll be walking this around to the WRU, and anybody who wants to follow with cameras or anything like that, be my guest. It's a weird experience at the moment for me. People might want to think that today would be a day when I might be ecstatic, but I'm actually not. I'm actually quite disappointed and saddened by the fact that it's needed somebody like me to come halfway around the world and discover what's really wrong with the Welsh Rugby Union, which is never talked about much. And in the last 4 months I've put the issue of what I regard as poor governance, poor management, fair and square, in the spotlight. One thing I do want to stress is that the WRU might try and spin this by saying that I can't call an EGM, and they're entirely correct. I can't, and I haven't. I've facilitated the calling of an EGM because somebody has to do that. And these 51 votes for an EGM in here are all been signed by the relative people at the clubs that have decided to call for this. And there may very well be more coming because there have been various people ringing up in the last 2 days to see whether they can still register their intent to call an EGM. One of the things that struck us is this might be a record number of clubs to have ever voted for an EGM. Now that's going to take some discovery. Historians with more information than me and my team have got, but if that is the case, that is an extraordinary result in itself. I remember when I first got back to Wales, I was told by a lot of people that I had absolutely no chance of succeeding. And I haven't succeeded yet. All I've succeeded in so far doing, along with some some wonderful helpers, is to actually convince enough clubs that they should call an EGM to bring the WRU to account. As I've said previously, I've always been underestimated my whole life, and I'm quite happy with that, because whilst you underestimate people, they can surprise you from time to time. How has it all come to this? How has it come to the situation where we now have over 50 clubs calling for an EGM, and we are sitting here weeks after the announcement of the new ERC competition, and the regions and the WRU still do not have an agreement going forward? A union which, by the way, put all of its faith in the old ERC and the fact that it was all going to be forever owned by the unions. They were proven to be wrong on both cases. And in actual fact, the WRU is generally regarded as being the union that led to that taking more time than was necessary. I think that the person who has got full responsibility for the position that the WR finds himself in is the Chief Executive Officer. He has the power to make things happen, or as increasingly is the case, to make things not happen. And it is quite clear that the clubs have had enough with the single issue that most likely has brought this to head is the leagues. Nearly 2 weeks ago, the board of the WRU had an emergency meeting which they were going to discuss the leagues. They still have not contacted the clubs to tell them what they decided, although we understand that they were going to advise the clubs that they would seek to get from the clubs their feedback. Well, I think we've got their feedback already. They don't like it, but the WRU sit on their hands and do nothing. They're a little bit like, in a whole range of issues, like rabbits caught in the headlights, not of a car, but of a dirty, great, big outback road train from Australia. And you know, if you're sitting, if you're rabbits in the headlight, you're sitting there, you don't know what to do, can't think of what to do, totally paralysed, then there's only going to be one outcome. And I think what we are seeing now is the WRU are going to be held to account. And most of that, as I said, is attributable to the Chief Executive Officer, who has not been able or willing to provide which is his responsibility, to provide a framework that allows the clubs and the regions to have faith, to be able to develop a partnership. And that is the Chief Executive's job, to do that. And we now have this unedifying situation where over 50 clubs are calling for an EGM, where the regions still don't know what they're doing. And importantly, the number one issue on the EGM is calling WRU to account for their incredibly incompetent handling of the new league structure. And here we are, getting towards the end of May. People don't know who they're playing against, where they're playing, and that's having a detrimental effect in many ways. Not only the potential for huge mismatches if this goes ahead, but those clubs that are wanting to get on and sell their sponsorships, which is a lifeblood of club rugby, can't do that. The clubs have found a voice, I think, now, and they're going to send a very strong message to the WRU that if you, the WRU, continue to ignore us, continue to behave in a dictatorial fashion, and in other words, you know, what we have is the closest thing to a totalitarian regime there. You know, I've nicknamed that building the Kremlin, because there is no discussion, you know, there is no real communication. They've upped their communication since I arrived back in Wales, but prior to that, you talk to clubs and they'll say that they would never hear from them from one month to the next. And there are a whole heap of issues that clubs have raised with me that are not even included in those 9 that are being used to call an EGM. It is, as I said, a sad day, not a day for rejoicing. And the fact that the clubs have called an EGM is, I think, a wake-up call to the WRU, because even if I'm not successful in achieving the outcomes, or the clubs aren't successful in achieving the outcomes, one thing that the WRU will know is that they have been brought to account. They will have to answer to their clubs. Because understand this, the only group with any power in Welsh rugby are the clubs. The WRU has some power which has ceded them from time to time by the clubs. As long as they continue to do a good job, they will let them get on with it. But there's so much wrong that the clubs have said, enough's enough, we're going to bring you guys to account. And I think that's right. And I think we're now seeing a situation where this WRU has never been, in the last 7 years, has never been brought to account to the extent that it has been over the last 4 or 5 months. And they're going to find out that their behaviour has consequences, like all of our behaviour has consequences. And they will find that out. So that's my brief statement. If you would like to answer me. If you'd like to ask me any questions, I'll be more than happy to take them.
What's the exact motion on the letter?
Oh, well, I'll have to dig into my little red box here and pull one out and read it to you. In accordance with Clause 30 of the Articles of Association, we hereby serve notice that we, the undersigned representing the Rugby Football Club, request that you proceed to convene and hold an extraordinary general meeting of the company in accordance with the aforesaid articles to vote on the following motion: that the WRU have not been acting in the best interests of Welsh rugby, and in particular the 320 clubs who are members of the WRU. Specifically, the chairman and board of the WRU have either deliberately or by oversight allowed the following to occur. And then comes the 9 points, which you've got a copy of. It goes on to talk about what's going to happen, and it's been signed in the proper way. So that's what that EGM, and it's been signed by the clubs. It's not been signed by me.
Is it a vote of no confidence in the board, or?
It's a vote of, yeah, it'll all depend how the board answers those 9 points as to whether they go for a vote of no confidence in the board or not.
What's the time period between?
Okay, my understanding of the Articles of Association of the WRU is that the WRU have 21 days to respond and set a date. Now, that date can be anywhere from 1 week to 2 or 3 weeks or something like that. I wouldn't expect it to be any longer than 4 weeks, and it'll be entirely up to them, but I would suggest that they would be making a huge error if they wanted to push it out any further than that, because I think that would just generally annoy the clubs even further. You see, the very first point in here that will be dealt with is this whole issue of the league's structure. They did not consult with the clubs. The clubs have felt highly aggrieved by that, and they need to know what they're going to be doing next year. If you want my view about what should happen, you could fix it in a nanosecond, is how you could fix this issue. All the WI needs to do is say, there's been so much concern about this, we're going to leave the league structure as they were for this last season just finished, and then over the next 12 months we'll discuss with you, the clubs, which we should have done in the first place, what your views are about the league structures going forward. How long did that take me to say that? Not very long at all. That's all it needs for them to do. But they won't. They won't even talk to the clubs about what the board has said. And I sheet this right back to the WRU Chief Executive Officer, because he has the power to do what I just did. To go to the board and say, there is so much unrest out there, this needs to be resolved. And this is the best way to resolve it, but it hasn't happened.
I think I know the answer, but are you prepared to name the clubs yet?
No.
That the union will.
No. Well, look, I have given the clubs my absolute assurance that I will not name them, and I am a man of my word. There have been 2 clubs who have publicly come out and said that they support it, and that is Welshpool and Old Iltydians. And that's the only reason I'm mentioning that, because they've already come out and done that. Now, the WRU still haven't had this, and they're going to get this after this press conference. If they want to release the names of the clubs, then it's up to them. It's not up to me to do that. You see, this is a club-driven, club-called EGM, and I said that I would act as the conduit for that, and I would keep their identities confidential, and I'm not going to resile from that.
It's the highest level, playing level, at which currently at.
We've got a wide range of clubs, and also a geographical spread of clubs, is what I'm prepared to say.
Is it because it's not changing the articles and everything, is it a straightforward majority that you'd need at an EGM?
At an EGM, yes.
Right.
There is some question, in actual fact, that I asked the WRU to clarify, but then they just sort of referred me to the to the articles instead of just quite simply telling me what the answer was. I asked them.
75, man, perhaps.
Yeah, but you see, the issue is for us is how many clubs are entitled to vote. We've always thought it was 320, but it might be that it's only 189. So, but we're not sure, because whilst there are 320 clubs, we're not quite sure what their voting status is. So it could well be that we only ever needed 28 clubs to call an EGM rather than the 32. Obviously 10% of the lower number. It's in the overall scheme of things, it doesn't mean very much, but that question is very, very important as you go into an EGM.
What was that other figure? The 289?
Well, 289 is the figure that we believe are the clubs that can vote, but we're not 100% sure, which is why I asked, and we got that off their documentation, which is why I sent a letter to an email to the WRU and got back a curt little thing saying, oh well, it's all public knowledge, just go and look on there. We'd done that. I was trying to get, because what I didn't want to do was to actually give them, you know, the wrong information. So that was the way they deal. That's the way they deal with that's the way they deal with me, certainly, but that's quite often the way they deal with clubs who write into the WRU and never ever get a reply. And that's there's documentation about that.
So David, would you expect the EGM then to take place no later than by the end of June?
Well, yes, but then that might get in the way of them going to South Africa.
So only one board member's going, aren't they? Or the elected board?
Oh, really? Well, you know a lot more than I do, so I guess that might be, you know, part of some pressure that's been coming on in relation to the cost of.
That's standard practice for overseas tours.
Oh, really? Mm. So I can't comment. I can't comment on that. So.
And the inner limit with this now 3 weeks, 21 days.
Yeah, for them to call it. Yeah. They have to call it within that period of time. Then they have to set the date.
How long do you give them then to address these issues before you decide whether to push for the vote of no confidence?
Oh, that'll happen at the actual EGM, and it's going to be, it'll be based on how the clubs feel that they are going to answer these particular questions, right? And I would suggest if these guys don't do their homework and come out with some plausible explanations that the clubs will believe, that they might be in a spot of bother.
So there'll be a decision on the day at the end of that?
Yes, it will be. Yeah, you couldn't possibly get a decision before. I mean, I think it's right and proper that the WRU be given an opportunity to respond to the issues on here, even though up until now one of the points here is that they were made a promise, the clubs, by the chairman, the chief executive and the president, to provide the facts contradicting a scurrilous and inaccurate financial expose by myself. That was their terms, not mine. And to this date, they still haven't done that. So if my figures that I produced, and which some of you guys actually put out there in you know, using your media, if my figures are so wrong, why haven't they come out and said so? Why haven't they come out, for example, and said that the £11 million in reserves is not a reserve, it's something else, which they seem to be trying to get people to believe. But all they need to do to fix that is to explain it. And they flatly refuse to explain anything. And that is why, one of the reasons why the clubs have had enough. And I think today the clubs have found their voice. And by taking this round there, they should sit up and take notice. And if they don't, look, I'm expecting all sorts of negativity about me and all sorts of things that they're going to raise. You know, I've heard that they're going to be raising, you know, issues about who's funding this yet again. There's some sort of claim that they've got proof of somebody funding me. Can I just tell you that the funding, the only funding that I've got from 137 sources, some of which wanted to remain anonymous, and they will remain anonymous, is through the crowdfunding to actually put on the debate, you know, in St David's. That's the only place that any funding that I've got, and some people have wanted to keep their donation anonymous, and I will forever respect that, as the media in this room would keep your sources anonymous. You know, there have been, you know, there's going to be other things that, for example, following something that was said by one of the regions last week, that I'm somehow, my PR campaign is somehow being run by RRW. Well, with the greatest of respect, I think me running my own media campaign is in stark contrast to RRW's media campaign. I do not need RRW or anybody else to run a media campaign for me, because I actually can do that myself. So and there's various things like this that I understand they're inventing in there, and they're going to come out to try and discredit me tomorrow. I will answer every single one of those if and when they do it. Including, I'll give you another one here now, right there in front of national television. Why did I leave in 2005? I left because I was suffering from quite a severe case of depression at the time. And, you know, there's been comment about how much I got paid and all this sort of rubbish. David Pickering, in his own comments in the media, has acknowledged that I had spoken to him at length about it, and that we had arrived at a satisfactory resolution that took into account my contract and all those things. So anybody out there who wants to engage in that sort of debate, I'm more than happy to have it. Because one of the things that I think everybody in this room who knows me knows that I will tell the truth. And I will not fudge anything.
Well, how big was your payoff?
That is confidential. See, confidentiality to me means it's confidential. You know, if you, well, God forbid that you will lose your job, mate, but if you, depends what you're right to, no. But mate, you know what I'm saying. If anybody here gets a confidential payoff, you know, you would keep it confidential, wouldn't you? That's what I'm doing.
So can you nail this down once and for all?
Yep.
Is regional rugby or any of the regions involved in funding your campaign?
No, they are not. This is all being funded myself, including the first trip, including the second trip. Airfares are quite expensive from New Zealand to here, even when you do travel economy class. And I have to try and keep my costs down. You know, the cost of this room is quite a lot of money. But, you know, nobody's asked me to do this. Nobody else is doing it. I am.
Is this personal then, between you and the CEO?
Not at all. You know, you can't say that anything's personal when all you're doing is actually, it's like you guys. You know, I've always believed, the media will know this, that you've got a job to do and I've got my job to do, and they're not the same, right? You are going to, well, back in those days, you could have a crack at me for whatever I did or didn't do. It was open slather. I fronted up and I dealt with all of those issues. You know, and it's the same with everything else. You know, I will front up and I'll tell you the truth.
It just goes the distance. You've got EGM now, and
Yeah.
you find yourself in a position of power on the WRU board.
Yes.
Despite what you say about it not being personal,
Yeah.
it's very targeted at certain people within that organisation. At the end of this, do you think you'd be in a position to be able to work legitimately with the union as it is, or do you think you'll have stirred up too much?
It depends upon the makeup of the board, you know. I mean, and if your question is also referring to the chief executive, I'd remind everybody here that the role of the chief executive is actually to work with the chairman and the board of the day. It's not the other way round. So that would be a matter for the chief executive if I was to get that far. As to the rest of the board, it would be up to them. You know, if the clubs felt that I had something to offer It would be a matter of I mean, you've got to remember that there are still 10 members on the board who were on the board when I inherited the unbelievable financial mess that they had actually bequeathed the Welsh Rugby Union prior to 2002 when I got here. And the one thing that really irks me a little bit is that, you know, there are lots of people that hate me for what happened to the Warriors, for example, right? Nobody mentions the real architect of that, which is Leighton Samuel. Nobody mentions the 10 members of the board who are still there, that were there when we decided we couldn't afford, we had no money. I didn't want to go to jail for spending money that I didn't have, you know, which is illegal. But nobody raises questions about them or about, you know, their role in loosely overseeing the demise of Welsh rugby to the point where it was only weeks away from being put through. Nobody mentions that. And what's also a little bit irksome is that, had it not been for me, a lot of the people that are on the board today would not have been on the board. If the union had gone through, and the harm that would have done to their positions and their reputations would have been quite large. But because of what I put in place, notwithstanding the fact that the chairman currently is trying to take the full credit for that, you know, that's not the case, because he'd been there for 5 years previously and nothing had happened. It just coincidentally happened when I arrived. And I'm very proud of that. Yeah, I'm not proud of the fact that we had to close the Warriors down, and, you know, and what I say is it's a good job that Nelson Mandela wasn't a Warriors supporter, because then he would never have forgiven anybody. And he happens to be my hero, Mandela, because no matter what they threw at him, he'd forgive it. And I've recognised that I've made some mistakes. And I'm happy to put my hand up to that. Nobody else seems to be able to do that. So when it comes to, Andy, your question about whether it's as personal, no, it's not personal. What this is about is actually exposing the current position in the WRU, which, if it's not fixed, is going to affect the WRU in the future at all levels of the game. Here's another example. I mean, I find it absolutely astonishing that the WRU haven't come out and congratulated the regions for the BT deal. Why is that the case? The regions have done a terrific job. They've taken some of the pressure off the WRU. They've gone out and they've signed a great deal. Why haven't they said something? You know, it's just appalling. If you're in a real partnership, you would have been the first one out there to say, congratulations, this is fantastic news.
With the chairmanship, which obviously is your
Yes.
ambition,
Mm-hmm.
there's no way that kind of becomes part of this EGM, is there?
No.
That's a separate...
Well, it could do, depending upon, if there is a vote of no confidence,
Yeah.
okay, what happens then is that each of the districts, currently 9, will have a nomination for one person to go on the interim board, and then there's room for one more. That's where I would be seeking that extra position.
If there were a vote of no confidence, there would be, in layman's terms, there'd be a gap that you could fill if you had the...
Yes, there is, and as long as I was a member of a club, right, and was a delegate for that club to the EGM.
Is that likely? Is that something you...
Oh yeah, I will definitely. Well, in order to be able to speak at the EGM, I'm going to have to be a delegate.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because as it stands today, say the EGM were to happen in 5 minutes' time,
Yeah.
you wouldn't be able to speak. So you are,
No, I wouldn't.
You're actively seeking...
Well, I'm not actively seeking. I just know which club, and I'm not going to tell you.
If there's a vote of no confidence and it's passed, and then it's interim board,
Yeah.
are you going to have candidates to stand for that board?
Oh look, it's up to the districts to put up members for the interim board. It's not up to me. You know, they could very well put all the people back in that, you know, they just got. But why would they do that for a start? You know, why would the club? You see, this is where in an EGM like that, the WRU's got to be very careful about how they manage that if it were to come about, because there's no point in upsetting the clubs any further. I wouldn't have thought.
If you could say you get the nomination from this particular club, we get to an EGM. I'm assuming it's your your intention to speak rather than sit there as a...
Oh no, yes. In actual fact, it says so in the document. Not that one. In that one there. Yeah. That they have nominated me to speak to the motion.
And what would be the end game then, David? A new board?
Yeah, what happens then,
EGM?
the interim board comes together and decides, they would normally decide who was going to be the chairman, but it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that the floor of the meeting could say, these are the 9, this is the extra guy, and we want that guy to be the chairman. Right? They could say that if they felt strongly enough about it. Then they would be charged with, running the WRU and then setting in place a motion to get a new board elected.
With a new chief executive?
No. The chief executive is appointed by the board and the chairman. And what is fact is that a chief executive cannot be removed at an EGM. He's the only board member that can't be.
Would you expect him to resign?
That'd be entirely a matter for him.
David, you made it clear from day one that you weren't going to go away, that you were here in your woods for the long haul. There must have been time since January when you thought, am I knocking my head against a brick wall?
Yeah, there are always times when you go through dark moments, and I've been through those, but I've been through enough of those in my life to know that, one, I'm not a quitter, and 2, if I passionately believe in something, then I will take it to whatever the conclusion is. And anybody who knows me knows that that's what I'm about. I mean, I demonstrated that the last time I was involved as a chief executive of the Welsh Rugby Union. You know, I made lots of enemies of people, but I got things done, and I'm actually a doer, not a talker. And this would be no different.
You've got 51 clubs, David, in...
Over 50.
50...
Yeah, over 50, 51, yeah.
In 19 weeks, give or take. So you've got, given the 21 days, another 4 weeks, so 7 weeks to get a majority. How difficult do you think that's going to be to get
Difficult. I don't underestimate the difficulty of everything that I've been doing. I didn't underestimate the difficulty of getting enough votes for an EGM. I don't underestimate the difficulty of getting the clubs to take the power back and to do what that document says. But that's entirely up to me, not anybody else. It's up to me to get around to the clubs and talk to them about the EGM, what it actually means, you know, what are the likely outcomes. That's never been done before. See, everything that we're doing has never been done before. You've never had a candidate stand up in a meeting like this, or 55 days ago stand up with a manifesto and say, this is my vision for what I think Welsh rugby could be like. And one thing I must make absolutely clear, it's on the bottom of this, and I'll, if you look at the very last part, the EGM is not an attempt by me to get the manifesto through. In actual fact, there's only one small mention of it in the EGM proposal. The only people that can change the governance of the WRU are the clubs. The clubs for so long have been ignored. They haven't been included in making big decisions, like, for example, whether they should repay the debt more quickly than was the case. They were never consulted with that. It was a huge decision, never consulted. But from the position that I'm coming from, if this goes as I would like to think, then the clubs will be fully consulted about a new way forward, about a new governance model, about how the clubs can regain some devolved powers. And we will not do anything that we don't think that the clubs will support. Because if we don't do something they'll support, they'll just vote it out. So this is not about the manifesto. And I've given the clubs my absolute guarantee that that is the case.
the thrust of it is that basically there's been too much money going into Team Wales, not enough to the grassroots. If you were to get your way, you get control. Would Team Wales, so international rugby, actually end up getting less from the Welsh Rugby?
No, no. I mean, you have to understand, I've got a very simple view about Team Wales. The engine room that drives Team Wales are the regions. They don't wake up one morning and knock on Gatland's door and say, I'm here to play for Wales. Before they do that, they've been nurtured as under 6s, under 7s, under 8s through the club rugby system. And then they go into academies if they're good enough. And then they go into a regional rugby team. And then they get to play for Wales. You know, the beneficiaries of, you know, what fills that place essentially are what the regions do. And there's never enough credit given to them. Sure, they've got problems of their own. And I'm not here, you'll notice there's nothing on here about regional rugby Wales. But I'm just saying that, you know, on this occasion, they deserve the congratulations for what's been going on in the last 10 years. And they're often vilified, wrongly. People have put millions and millions of pounds into that level of the game of their own money to make sure that Wales is successful. And yet, in the media and out there in rugby land, they're vilified. Without grassroots rugby, you haven't got a game, right? That is an absolute given. Without the women who give up all their time, without all of the other volunteers, you've got no game. And that's true for here, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, anywhere. You haven't got a game. Without the regions, you haven't got a professional game. Because the step up between what was the case and then the regions was way, way too huge. You know, and they need to be given credit.
So might there then be a drop in the amount of money that would go directly to...
No, as we've seen with the BT announcement, I don't talk about a drop of money. I talk about building the pie, making a bigger pie, which is where my combined player contracts comes in. But, you know, it's about actually building the pie and developing such strong relationships with your major deliverer of services, i.e. the regions, that you can work with them to actually, which is actually what I thought that mob over there wanted them to do. I thought they wanted them to go out there and build relationships and get more money coming into the game. And when they do that, silence.
David, what does it say when the regions can agree deals with Europe and BT Sport, but they can't agree deals with their partners?
Well, that was one of the reasons why I'm here, I guess. It was the original reason I came back to Wales, was because I thought that but then when I got here I realised there was an awful lot more wrong with Wales. But it is atrocious, you know. And I'm not suggesting that the regions are blameless in all of this, but I'm very sorry, but I attach most of the blame to that, to the Chief Executive Officer of the WRU. We're still sitting here now, what is it, the end of May, and there's still no deal done. I famously said when I came back that I could get a deal done in 10 days, right, if I was in a position to do it. I would still say that today. If I was in a position to do it, it would take me 10 days to hammer out an agreement with the regions that would be actually in the best interests of them and Welsh Rugby. Any other questions?
How much reserves should the WRU carry?
Do you know something? That's a very interesting question. My view would be about £5 million would be about the right number. I'll tell you why. Because most companies with a £62 million turnover would most likely opt for larger reserves. But the WRU doesn't need to do that because they have known income streams. They don't have the peaks and troughs on their income streams that a normal company does. You know, they've got an income stream that generally goes like that. Unfortunately for the WRU, they've got costs that go like that as well, which they could have avoided, which I do believe that they can still avoid. But that is the reason why I think £5 million would be enough. And that would leave £6 million now and some more millions in the future on an ongoing basis to be invested into the game. Because at the end of the day, Why have they got £11 million reserves? What's it doing? What's it there for? Is it there to buy Cardiff Arms Park so they can finish Glenmore's Gap? Is it there for because they felt that at one stage they might like to start up their own regional teams? What's it there for? I don't know. They don't tell anybody.
Have you got a programme in place to go around clubs now and captain?
Oh, well, that's my next job. I've only just got back yesterday, so we'll be getting onto that.
How many professional regions do you think Wales can sustain?
Well, I think at the moment they can sustain 4, as long as the infrastructure around 4 is right, which includes my view about combined player contracts, which is a form of central contracting, but it's not being used anywhere else in the world at the moment. And so therefore, I think if we can get the whole what's the word I'm looking for, the right playing field, if you like, then we should be able to have 4 teams. We may have to give the regions more opportunity to use, in the short term, more overseas players, a little bit like Ireland does, just so that we can then bring all of our young players through. I mean, you know, and I know that Warren Gatland or the Blues, I'm not quite sure which one, is looking at Gareth Anscombe at the moment, who is Welsh qualified because his mother was born in Wales. You know, so it's that sort of thing that could bring on the youngsters more quickly, and we've seen that in the past with the Teichmans and those sorts of players.
Why hasn't key performance indicators for the regions ever been brought in?
Don't ask me. I don't run the WRU.
Can you?
Why haven't the WRU got KPIs? You know, I mean, it's.
Can you tell us a little bit about your vision for North Wales? Because obviously all the dialogue I have with them, they're obviously very concerned about the future and how they've been the way they see it.
I went right through North Wales, and there are some issues that become very apparent very quickly. One, there is not a universal liking for RGC, as one would think, and that surprised me. Although I think RGC represents the best opportunity for North Wales to have a professional team in the future. When you see the facilities that they've got, they're terrific, actually, and Rupert Moon's doing a great job. But one of the big issues with North Wales and Mid Wales is that because they can't play anybody else, they just play each other all the time. And the reason for that is that clubs from South Wales won't do one trip a year away to play against those North Wales teams. Now, to me, that attitude needs to change. And if the WRU has got to provide a bit of extra funding, you know, and transport costs and all that sort of thing, then so be it. But people need to be able to aspire. And that is exactly what is taken away with the proposed league structure, going to 3 divisions. And that's one thing I got wrong. I got that absolutely wrong. I'll get back to that in a minute. But yeah, no, so there's a whole range of issues that need to be addressed with the people of North Wales. And the fundamental one is that, you know, that they feel included as part of Wales. Those people that were around at the time may remember that I wanted North Wales as one of the 4 regions. I was passionate about giving North Wales a Brumby-style opportunity, and I was prevented from doing that for a whole lot of reasons. But so no, North Wales is very, very important in the future of Welsh rugby, in my view.
Is there a case for a region to be moved from South Wales to North Wales?
No, I don't think so. I think what's got to happen in South Wales is there's got to be a greater identity of the teams that actually represent the region. The region is a geographical area. It is not a team, which is why you'll hear me call the regions clubs rather than regions, because they're not. The region is that geographical area, and there's a team in there. So,
Do you think then a Brumby-style team in North Wales is sustainable?
A team in North Wales? Absolutely would be.
David,
But
football's been around a hell of a lot longer as a professional sport than rugby.
yeah,
And in South Wales it has only ever supported 3
Teams.
professional clubs. What makes you think that 4 professional rugby operations in the same narrow part of South Wales can prove themselves right?
because it's still our national sport, and because we got a lot of talent coming through, a huge amount of talent coming through. We just got to hang on to it, and that was done quite well in this last year. But prior to that time, a lot of players had gone overseas. What Wales can't become is the same as FAW, which is where all their players. I don't know. There was a media conference today naming the Welsh team. How many of those players are playing in Wales? Not many, I would suggest. I don't know, but not many.
But
And
the fact that not one of the 4 regions has got a 5-figure average attendance.
No.
In fact, most of them are dwindling.
No, that's right. And so that has to be resolved. And you can only resolve that by sitting down with them and working out how you're going to do it. Not this constant battering and battling and, you know, which does nobody any good at all. But I mean, you know, I'm really not here to talk about the regions. I mean, the regions are really a separate issue as far as I'm concerned. I'm more concerned about the grassroots.
Do you think, though, that all this battering and political infighting is why those attendances are going down when they're going up in Ireland and Scotland?
It could very well be part of it. It also worries me that because, I mean, 2009 was exactly the same, right? You have to ask yourself, why would any player want to come and play in this sort of an environment from somewhere else? You know, the top Kiwis who are going to become Australians, who are going to be coming and playing in greater droves after the World Cup. Money is one object, obviously. That's why a lot of them will go to France. But in the end, France will realise that that's not sustainable. Then where do they go to next? They actually don't go to England. They go to Ireland, and then they go to England. And as an afterthought, they may want to come to Wales. What I would like to see happen is that Wales was the next cab off the rank after France, because we cannot compete with the French money. But at the moment, you know, I think there are a couple of New Zealand coaches coming shortly, you know, and I'm not quite sure how they'll go. You know, the whole culture in a rugby team is like worlds apart between New Zealand and Wales, and so they're going to have to make some major adjustments, I think.
Did you fear, perhaps, David, strategically, when you first came, that your presence would be a catalyst by which the union would say, well, the one way of taking the ground from under your feet would be to do a deal with the regions? The fact that they haven't, does that suggest to you that there is a lack of will to do such?
I don't think they know what to do at the moment, to be perfectly honest with you. I think they, in a whole range of fronts, they just simply do not know how to react to what's going on. And I think that's, to me, it doesn't show very good leadership. If I'd been in there and somebody like me, upstart like me, had come along, I would have called the EGM months ago. Get it out of the way before I even had a sniff of getting any momentum. You'd never have got to that if they had done that. And now what they're going to do tomorrow, I understand, is they're going to try and discredit me and all that sort of stuff. It's all too late for that. You know, so I honestly don't know what their thinking is at the moment. I don't know who's driving, if they have a strategy, who's driving it, if they have a PR campaign, who's driving it. I just don't understand. You know. Okay, thank you. Happy to do some 101s, and seeing as it stopped raining, we'll then...
Thank you.
Thank you.
49 minutes.
How more?
49 minutes.
Jeez. Well, you'll be able to get that down to 2 pars.
I think
doing my best.